My name is Rachel Thompson. I'm 27 years old, and I still remember the exact moment I realized my parents had sold my car without even asking me. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind of crisp autumn day that makes Portland's skyline look like a postcard, with Mount Hood visible in the distance and the leaves turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson. I was walking up the driveway after my shift at the coffee shop, my second job that day, still wearing my apron that smelled like espresso and vanilla syrup. My feet ached in my worn sneakers, and all I wanted was to collapse into my little blue Honda Civic and drive to my apartment, where I could finally breathe. But my car wasn't there. I stood in the empty spot where I'd parked it that morning, staring at the oil stain on the concrete like it might magically materialize my vehicle. The October wind cut through my thin uniform shirt, and I felt this strange, hollow sensation in my chest, like someone had reached inside and scooped out my heart. My first instinct was that it had been stolen, but our neighborhood in southeast Portland wasn't exactly a hotbed of car theft. We lived in one of those middle-class areas where people still left their porch lights on for each other and waved when they walked their dogs past your house. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and called my mom. Susan Thompson answered on the third ring, her voice carrying that artificially cheerful tone she used when she was trying to avoid something. "Hi, sweetheart. How was work today?" "Mom, where's my car?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Something cold was spreading through my stomach. There was a pause, a long, telling pause that made my worst fears crystallize into reality. "Oh, Rachel, we were going to talk to you about that tonight at dinner. Why don't you come inside? Your father and I need to discuss something with you." I ended the call without saying goodbye and walked toward the house I'd grown up in. The same two-story colonial with the blue shutters and the rose garden my mother tended religiously. Every step felt like I was walking underwater. The familiar creak of the front porch, the sound of our old golden retriever, Buddy, barking from the backyard, the smell of my mother's pot roast wafting from the kitchen. It all felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. Inside, my parents were sitting at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd done homework as a kid, where we'd celebrated birthdays, where I'd told them about getting my first real job. They looked like they were waiting for me. My father David with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. My mother Susan twisting her wedding ring the way she did when she was nervous. "Sit down, honey," my mother said, gesturing to the chair across from them. I remained standing. "Where is my car?" My father cleared his throat, that same sound he'd made when he had to tell me we couldn't afford the senior trip to Europe, or when my childhood cat had to be put down. "Rachel, you know Mark's wedding is this Saturday. What does Mark's wedding have to do with my car? The catering costs went up." My mother jumped in, her words tumbling over each other in her rush to explain. "Olivia's family expected us to contribute more than we'd budgeted for, and with the venue deposit and the flowers and the photographer, you sold my car." It wasn't a question anymore. The truth hit me like a physical blow, and I had to grip the back of the chair to keep from swaying. "We got a good price for it," my father said quickly, as if that would somehow make it better. $5,000. That's more than you paid for it, isn't it? I stared at him. $5,000. I'd saved for 18 months to buy that car, working double shifts at the coffee shop and picking up weekend hours at the local bookstore. I'd eaten ramen noodles for dinner more times than I could count, had turned down nights out with friends, had worn the same 3 outfits to work until they were practically threadbare. That car represented every sacrifice I'd made, every hour I'd worked when I was so tired I could barely stand, every small dream I'd postponed so I could have something that was truly mine. "That was my car," I whispered, and my voice sounded strange and small in the kitchen that suddenly felt enormous. "I saved for it. I bought it. It was in my name. Technically, sweetheart, it was in our name too," my mother said gently, reaching across the table as if to touch my hand. I jerked back. "Remember, we had to co-sign because of your credit." The room spun slightly. Yes, they had co-signed. I'd been 23 when I bought the car, fresh out of college with student loan debt and no established credit history. The bank had required a co-signer, and my parents had agreed to help. But I'd made every payment myself, every single one, for 4 years. The insurance, the maintenance, the registration fees, all of it had come from my own paychecks. "I made every payment," I said, and I could hear my voice getting smaller and smaller. "Every single one. For 4 years. We know you did, and we're so proud of you for that," my father said, and the patronizing tone in his voice made me want to scream. "But Mark needs this money for his wedding. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Rachel, he's our son too, and Olivia's family has certain expectations. Olivia's family, the Carters, with their sprawling house in the West Hills, their country club membership, their casual mentions of vacation homes and private schools. I'd met them exactly twice, and both times I'd felt like I was being appraised and found wanting. Olivia herself was pleasant enough, a blonde 25-year-old with a marketing degree and a trust fund, but her parents had a way of looking at our family like we were slightly beneath their social circle. "You could have asked me," I said, and I hated how my voice cracked on the words. "You could have talked to me about it. Would you have said yes?" my mother asked, and there was something almost accusatory in her tone. "And would you really have agreed to sell your car to help your brother?" The honest answer was no. No, I wouldn't have agreed, because I needed that car to get to work, to get groceries, to have some small measure of independence in a world where everything felt like it was slipping away from me. But looking at my parents' faces, seeing the way they were watching me with a mixture of guilt and defiance, I realized that my answer didn't matter. They'd already decided that Mark's wants were more important than my needs. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. "How am I supposed to get to work?" "You can borrow your mother's car when you need it," my father said, waving his hand as if this was a minor inconvenience. "And there's public transportation. The bus line runs right past both of your jobs." Public transportation. The bus that took 45 minutes to make a trip that took 15 minutes by car. The bus that stopped running at 10 p.m., which meant I'd have to leave my evening shifts early or find another way home. The bus where I'd have to stand in the rain at dark bus stops, carrying tips and wondering if I'd make it home safely. "This is temporary," my mother said, reaching for my hand again. This time I let her take it, mostly because I was too numb to pull away. "After the wedding, things will settle down. Maybe Mark can help you find another car, or—" "Mark doesn't even know you sold my car, does he?" I interrupted, and from the way my parents' eyes met across the table, I knew I was right. "You didn't tell him. There was no need to worry him with it," my father said. "He has enough on his plate with the wedding planning." Of course. Mark couldn't be troubled with the knowledge that his dream wedding was being funded by the theft of his sister's most prized possession. Mark, who'd gotten a job at his father-in-law's investment firm straight out of college. Mark, who'd never had to work 2 jobs or eat ramen for dinner or carefully calculate whether he could afford gas for the week. Mark, who'd always been the golden child, the successful son, the one who'd brought home good grades and athletic trophies, and now a beautiful fiancé from a wealthy family. I pulled my hand away from my mother's and stood up. The kitchen felt suffocating, full of the smell of pot roast and the weight of 27 years of being the second choice, the afterthought, the daughter who was expected to understand and sacrifice and smile through it all. "I need to go," I said. "Rachel, please don't be like this," my mother called after me as I headed for the door. "It's just a car. Family is more important than things." I stopped in the doorway and turned back to look at them. These 2 people who'd raised me and claimed to love me, but who'd just proven that their love came with conditions and priorities that didn't include my well-being. "It wasn't just a car to me," I said quietly. "It was proof that I could take care of myself. It was freedom. It was the first thing I ever owned that was completely mine." I paused, feeling tears threatening behind my eyes. But I guess that doesn't matter. I walked out of the house and kept walking, down the tree-lined street where I'd learned to ride a bike, past the park where I'd played as a child, through the neighborhood that had shaped me but never quite felt like home. The October air was getting colder as the sun set, and I pulled my thin jacket tighter around my shoulders. My phone buzzed with texts from my mother. "Please come back. Let's talk about this. We can work something out." But I ignored them. I ended up at the bus stop 3 blocks from my apartment, sitting on the cold metal bench and watching cars drive past in the gathering darkness. Every blue Honda that went by made my chest tighten. I thought about the coffee shop where I'd have to explain why I'd be taking the bus now, about the bookstore where my Saturday morning shifts would become impossible without reliable transportation, about all the small indignities that would pile up because my parents had decided that Mark's happiness was worth more than mine. But mostly, I thought about the wedding that was 5 days away, the celebration where I'd be expected to smile and hug my brother and congratulate him on his new life, while pretending that the foundation of my own life hadn't just been sold out from under me for the price of upgraded catering. When the bus finally came, 40 minutes later, I climbed on and paid my fare with crumpled dollar bills from my apron pocket. As we pulled away from the curb, I caught my reflection in the window, pale, tired, defeated. For 27 years, I'd been the good daughter, the understanding sister, the one who didn't make waves or ask for too much. I'd swallowed every slight, every instance of preferential treatment, every time my achievements were overshadowed by Mark's latest success. But looking at that reflection, something shifted inside me, something hard and determined that I'd never felt before. They wanted me to smile through this wedding, to be gracious and family-oriented and understanding. Fine, I could do that, but I was also going to do something else. The bus lurched to a stop at my corner, and I stood up on unsteady legs. As I walked the final block to my apartment, I was already planning. There were documents in my filing cabinet at home, papers I'd kept carefully organized the way I organized everything in my life: registration forms, insurance documents, payment records, 4 years of proof that the car they'd sold was mine in every way that mattered. I climbed the stairs to my third-floor apartment and unlocked the door to my small but tidy space, the first place that had ever been completely mine. Tomorrow, I'd start making some calls. I'd smile at the wedding, dance at the reception, and raise a toast to the happy couple. And then, I'd show them exactly what family loyalty was worth. The next morning, I woke up to my alarm at 5:30 a.m., the same time I'd been waking up for the past 4 years to get ready for my opening shift at Grind Coffee. For a split second, in that hazy space between sleep and consciousness, I reached for my car keys on the nightstand. Then reality crashed back over me like ice water, and I remembered that I no longer had a car to drive. I sat on the edge of my bed in my small studio apartment, looking out the window at the gray Portland morning. Rain was pattering against the glass, because of course it was raining. October in Portland meant rain, and today felt like the weather was matching my mood perfectly. I checked my phone. The bus to downtown would take an hour and 20 minutes, which meant I needed to leave in 30 minutes to make it to work on time. 30 minutes to shower, get dressed, eat something resembling breakfast, and walk 6 blocks to the bus stop in the rain. This was my life now. I pulled on my jeans and the green Grind Coffee t-shirt that I'd washed so many times it was soft as tissue paper. In the mirror above my dresser, I looked exactly like what I was, a 27-year-old woman who was barely keeping her head above water, whose parents had just pulled the rug out from under her for the sake of her brother's wedding to a trust fund princess. The bus ride into downtown was everything I'd feared it would be. Crowded, slow, filled with the morning commuters who looked as tired and defeated as I felt. I stood pressed against other bodies, holding onto a metal rail that was sticky with who knows what, watching the city wake up through rain-streaked windows. Every few minutes, a car would pass us, and I'd feel that stab of loss all over again. That could have been me, warm and dry in my own space, listening to my own music, getting to work in 15 minutes instead of an hour and 20. I got to Grind Coffee 10 minutes late, soaked from the walk from the bus stop, and found my manager Jake already behind the espresso machine with a line of customers stretching out the door. "Thompson," he called out, not looking up from steaming milk. "You're late." "I know, I'm sorry," I said, hurrying to tie my apron around my waist. I had transportation issues. Jake was 23, 3 years younger than me, and had gotten the manager position 6 months ago despite having half my experience. His parents had bought him a brand new Toyota for graduation, and he lived in a trendy apartment in the Pearl District that his dad helped pay for. "What happened to your car?" I started pulling shots of espresso, focusing on the familiar ritual of grinding, tamping, and brewing. "It's complicated," Jake snorted. "Either you have a car or you don't, Thompson. Which is it?" The customers were getting restless, and I could feel their impatience radiating across the counter. I forced myself to smile at the next person in line, a woman in an expensive coat who was checking her watch and sighing loudly. "I don't have a car right now," I said to Jake, handing the woman her latte. But I'm here, and I'm working." "Well, you better figure something out," Jake said, moving closer so the customers couldn't hear. "This is a business, not a charity. If you can't get to work on time, I'll find someone who can." I nodded and kept working, making drink after drink with practiced efficiency. But inside, I was screaming. Jake had never had to worry about transportation, had never had to choose between groceries and gas money, had never had his most prized possessions sold out from under him by the people who were supposed to love him most. And now he was threatening my job, one of the only things I had left. The morning rush finally died down around 10, and I found myself alone behind the counter for the first time in hours. That's when I saw Mark walk through the door. My brother looked good. He always looked good. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders from his college football days, perfectly styled brown hair that somehow looked effortless, even though I knew he spent 20 minutes on it every morning. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, and he had that easy confidence that came from never having to worry about money or transportation or whether you could afford lunch. "Rachel," he said, spreading his arms wide like he was greeting me at a family reunion instead of showing up at my job unannounced. "There's my favorite sister. I'm your only sister," I said automatically, the response we'd been exchanging since childhood, but my voice was flat, and I didn't move to hug him. Mark's smile faltered slightly. He glanced around the coffee shop, taking in the chipped paint on the walls, the mismatched furniture, the general wear and tear of a place that catered to people who counted their dollars before ordering. "Can we talk?" he asked, lowering his voice. I looked at the clock. "I'm working. Come on, Rachel. 5 minutes. Please." There was something in his voice I didn't recognize. Uncertainty, maybe even guilt. I told Jake I was taking my break and led Mark to a corner table near the window, where we could watch the rain fall on the busy downtown street. "Mom told me what happened," Mark said as soon as we sat down. "Did she?" I kept my voice neutral, professional, the same tone I used with difficult customers. "What exactly did she tell you?" Mark shifted in his chair. "She said there was some confusion about your car, that you were upset about them selling it. Some confusion, as if my car being sold without my knowledge or consent was just a simple misunderstanding, like double booking a restaurant reservation." "There's no confusion," I said. "They sold my car to pay for your wedding, without asking me, without even telling me until after it was done." Mark was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the traffic. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than usual. "I didn't know. I swear to God, Rachel, I had no idea they were going to do that." I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. Mark had always been a good liar when we were kids. He could convince our parents that he'd done his homework when it was still sitting blank on his desk, could talk his way out of trouble with a smile and a smooth explanation. But right now, he looked genuinely shocked. "The Carters wanted a bigger reception," he continued, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Olivia's mom kept pushing for more expensive everything. Better flowers, more courses at dinner, an upgraded bar package. Dad said they could handle it, that it wouldn't be a problem. So you knew money was tight." I knew it was more than they'd originally budgeted for. "Yeah, but Dad said—" Mark stopped, seeming to realize how that sounded. I should have asked more questions. Should have. The words hung between us like a neon sign. My brother, who'd graduated summa cum laude from business school, who worked in finance and dealt with numbers and budgets every day, should have asked where the extra money for his dream wedding was coming from. "It's too late now," I said. "The car's gone. The money's spent on your flowers and upgraded bar package. Rachel, I'm sorry. I really am. If you'd known, what?" I leaned forward in my chair. "Would you have called off the wedding, told Olivia's parents that your sister's transportation was more important than their social expectations?" Mark was quiet again, and in that silence, I had my answer. He might feel guilty about it now, but given the choice between disappointing his fiancé's wealthy family and sacrificing his sister's independence, he would make the same decision. He would choose the wedding, choose Olivia, choose the life that was being offered to him on a silver platter. "I'll pay you back," he said finally. "After the wedding, after the honeymoon, I'll get you the money for another car." "When?" I asked. "Because I need to get to work every day. I need to buy groceries. I can't wait 6 months for you to maybe find room in your budget for me." "I don't know exactly when," Mark admitted. "And money's going to be tight for a while. The wedding, the honeymoon to Italy, and then Olivia wants to start looking at houses in the West Hills." Of course she did. The West Hills, where houses started at 7 figures and came with views of the city and Mount Hood, where Mark would live the kind of life I could only dream about, while I took the bus to my 2 minimum wage jobs. "So let me get this straight," I said, and I could feel my composure starting to crack. "Mom and Dad sold my car to pay for your wedding to a woman whose family has more money than all of us combined. You didn't know, but you also didn't ask questions when the budget mysteriously expanded. And now you'll pay me back someday, maybe, when it's convenient for you and your new wife." "It's not like that," Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then what is it like?" I stood up from the table, suddenly unable to sit still. "And because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the whole family decided that your happiness was more important than my ability to take care of myself." Mark stood up too, and for a moment we faced each other across the small table like adversaries instead of siblings. Rachel, you're my sister. I love you. But this is my wedding. This is the biggest day of my life. And what about my life? The words came out louder than I'd intended, and a few customers turned to look at us. I lowered my voice but couldn't soften the edge in it. What about the fact that I worked 18 months to save for that car? What about the fact that I've been making payments on it for 4 years? What about the fact that it was the first thing I ever owned that was completely mine? It was just a car, Mark said, and the dismissive tone in his voice was so much like our father's that I actually took a step back. It wasn't just a car to me. My voice was barely above a whisper now, but every word was crystal clear. It was proof that I could make it on my own. It was independence. It was hope. Mark's face softened slightly. Rachel, I didn't know it meant that much to you. You never asked. None of you ever ask what things mean to me. You just assume that I'll understand, that I'll be supportive, that I'll sacrifice whatever I need to sacrifice for the good of the family. I picked up my apron from the chair where I'd laid it. Well, I understand perfectly now. What's that supposed to mean? I tied my apron around my waist and gave my brother the brightest smile I could manage. It means I'll be at your wedding on Saturday. I'll smile for the pictures and dance at the reception and toast your happiness. I'll be the perfect sister, just like always. Mark looked relieved. Rachel, thank you. I know this has been hard, but I'm not finished, I said, and something in my tone made him stop talking. I'll be the perfect sister at your wedding, but after that, things are going to be different between us. All of us. What do you mean? I looked at my brother, really looked at him, at his expensive suit, and his confident posture, and his assumption that everything would work out fine because it always had for him, at the man who'd never had to choose between groceries and gas money, who'd never had to work 2 jobs to afford a car, who'd never had his most prized possession sold out from under him for someone else's benefit. And I mean that I'm done being the one who always understands. I'm done being the one who always sacrifices. I'm done being the afterthought in this family. I paused, watching his face carefully. And I'm done pretending that what you all did to me was okay. Mark opened his mouth to say something, but I was already walking away, back to the espresso machine where Jake was waiting with his arms crossed and a line of impatient customers forming again. Oh, everything okay? Jake asked, though his tone suggested he didn't really care. Everything's perfect, I said, and started making drinks with renewed focus. For the rest of my shift, I thought about the conversation with Mark, replaying every word and every expression. He was sorry. I believed that much. But he wasn't sorry enough to do anything about it. He wasn't sorry enough to postpone his Italian honeymoon, or suggest that maybe his new in-laws could contribute more to their daughter's wedding. He was sorry in the abstract, the way people are sorry about natural disasters or global warming, sad about the situation but not responsible for fixing it. When my shift ended at 2, I took the bus to my second job at Powell's Books, the massive independent bookstore that was one of Portland's most famous landmarks. I'd been working there on weekends and weekday afternoons for 3 years, and it was the job I actually loved, being surrounded by thousands of books, helping customers find exactly what they were looking for, discovering new authors during quiet moments. It felt like a sanctuary compared to the frantic pace of the coffee shop, but even Powell's couldn't lift my mood today. I spent my shift in the fiction section, shelving returns and trying not to think about how I was going to get home after the store closed at 11. The buses stopped running at 10:30, which meant I'd either have to leave early and lose hours I desperately needed, or figure out another way to get home. At 9:30, I swallowed my pride and called my mother. "Rachel, I'm so glad you called," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I was worried about you after yesterday. I need a ride home from work," I said without preamble. "The buses stop running before my shift ends." "Of course, sweetheart. Where are you?" "Powell's. I get off at 11. "I'll be there," she said immediately. "Rachel, I'm really glad you called. I was hoping we could talk." "We can talk in the car," I said, and hung up. My mother was waiting in the parking lot when I got off work, her Honda Accord running with the heater on against the October chill. I climbed into the passenger seat and immediately felt the familiar sensation of being a teenager again, dependent on my parents for transportation and everything else. "How was work?" she asked as we pulled out of the parking lot. "Which job?" I asked. "The one where my manager threatened to fire me for being late because I don't have a car, or the one where I had to leave early because I don't have a way to get home." My mother was quiet for a moment, navigating the empty downtown streets. "Rachel, I know you're angry." "I'm not angry," I interrupted. "Angry doesn't begin to cover what I am. Then what are you? I stared out the passenger window at the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. I'm heartbroken. I'm disappointed. I'm realizing that the people I thought I could count on don't actually see me as a person with my own needs and dreams and struggles. That's not true, my mother said, and her voice cracked slightly. We love you. We've always loved you. Love isn't enough if it doesn't come with respect. I turned to look at her, this woman who'd raised me and claimed to want the best for me, but had just proven that her definition of best didn't include my autonomy or my feelings. Did you even consider asking me? For even 1 second? My mother's hands tightened on the steering wheel. We considered it, but we knew you'd say no. So you decided to just take it anyway. We decided to make a difficult decision for the good of the family. She glanced at me, then back at the road. Sometimes parents have to make hard choices, Rachel. Sometimes we have to ask one child to sacrifice for another. Why is it always me? The question burst out of me before I could stop it. Why is it always me who has to sacrifice? When Mark wanted to go to that expensive summer baseball camp in high school, you took money from my college fund. When he needed help with his down payment on his condo, you co-signed his loan even though you said you couldn't help me with my student loans. And now this. It's always me who has to understand. Me who has to be flexible. Me who has to give up what I want for what Mark needs. My mother pulled up to a red light and turned to face me fully. In the glow from the traffic signal, I could see tears in her eyes. Mark has always been easier, she said quietly. Easier to help, easier to support. He asks for what he needs, and he knows how to make things work out. You're so independent, Rachel. You always have been. Even as a little girl, you insisted on doing everything yourself, so because I'm independent, I don't deserve help. That's not what I said. Then what are you saying? The light turned green, and my mother drove through the intersection toward my apartment. I'm saying that maybe we took your independence for granted. Maybe we assumed you'd be okay because you always land on your feet. Well, I'm not okay, I said, and my voice broke on the words. I'm not okay, and I'm not going to land on my feet this time. And I can't believe that you and Dad thought it was acceptable to sell my car without even talking to me about it. We pulled up in front of my building, and I reached for the door handle, but my mother's voice stopped me. Rachel, wait, there's something else. I turned back to her, and the expression on her face made my stomach clench with dread. The wedding is on Saturday, she said. Olivia's parents are expecting you to be there. They've specifically asked about you. Of course I'll be there. I already told Mark I would be. I mean, they're expecting you to be in the wedding party. I stared at her. What? Olivia's maid of honor had to drop out last week, family emergency, and she asked if you could step in, as a favor to Mark. My mother's voice was carefully neutral, but I could see the plea in her eyes. The dress is already ordered, in your size. Everything's arranged. I felt like I was falling, like the ground had opened up beneath me and I was tumbling into some alternate reality where my family's audacity had no limits. Let me get this straight, I said slowly. You sold my car to pay for Mark's wedding, and now you want me to be in that wedding? To smile and pose for pictures and pretend to be thrilled about the celebration that was funded by the destruction of my independence? It would mean a lot to Mark, my mother said, and to the family. I got out of the car and leaned down to look at her through the passenger window. I'll be there on Saturday, I said. I'll smile and be gracious and play the part of the supportive sister, but I will not be in the wedding party. I will not pretend that this is anything other than what it is. Rachel, please? I stepped back from the car. Thank you for the ride. I'll find my own way to the wedding. I walked up to my apartment without looking back, leaving my mother sitting in her car at the curb. Inside my small studio, I sat on my bed and stared at the filing cabinet in the corner, where I kept all my important documents, 4 years of car payments, insurance records, registration renewals, the original purchase agreement from the dealership, all proof that the car they'd sold was legally, morally, and ethically mine. I pulled out my laptop and started making a list. Phone numbers, document references, legal terms I'd need to research. If my family wanted to play games with my life, if they wanted to treat me like a child who couldn't be trusted to make her own decisions, then they were about to learn exactly what kind of woman they'd raised. Outside my window, Portland was settling into its late-night rhythm. Traffic sounds, distant music, the occasional siren. It was the soundtrack of a city full of people trying to make their way in the world, just like me. But unlike them, I had something most people didn't have. I had documentation, and I had nothing left to lose. Saturday was still 4 days away. That gave me plenty of time to prepare my surprise. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made Portland look like a movie set. The rain had stopped overnight, leaving the streets washed clean and the air sharp with the promise of winter. I stood at my kitchen window, drinking instant coffee and watching the sun paint Mount Hood gold in the distance, trying to work up the energy for another day of buses and double shifts and pretending everything was normal. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, Rachel. This is Olivia. Can we meet for coffee today? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." I stared at the message for a long moment. In the 3 years that Mark had been dating Olivia Carter, we'd probably exchanged fewer than 50 words total. She was pleasant enough at family dinners, always polite and perfectly dressed, but we moved in completely different worlds. She worked in marketing for her father's commercial real estate company, lived in a trendy Pearl District loft that probably cost more per month than I made in 3, and had the kind of effortless confidence that came from never having to worry about money. I texted back, "I work until 2. Grind coffee on Morrison if you want to meet there." Her response came immediately. "Perfect. See you at 2:15. The morning shift at Grind Coffee was brutal. The espresso machine broke down twice. We ran out of oat milk during the height of the morning rush, and Jake spent most of his time in the office, doing inventory, while I handled the line of increasingly impatient customers by myself. By the time 2 o'clock rolled around, I was exhausted, covered in coffee grounds, and in no mood to make polite conversation with my brother's fiancée, but Olivia surprised me. She walked into the coffee shop at exactly 2:15, looking perfectly put together in a camel-colored coat and designer boots. But her usual composed expression was replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. "Rachel," she said, approaching the counter where I was cleaning the espresso machine. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "I'm here anyway," I said, not looking up from my work. "What did you want to talk about?" Olivia glanced around the coffee shop, taking in the chipped paint and mismatched furniture with the same expression Mark had worn yesterday. "Could we sit down? It's kind of important." I told Jake I was taking my break and led Olivia to the same corner table where I'd sat with Mark. She ordered a lavender latte. Of course she did. And I got myself a plain black coffee, partly because I couldn't afford anything fancier, and partly because I wanted to emphasize the difference between us. "I heard about your car," Olivia said as soon as we sat down. I looked at her carefully. "What exactly did you hear?" "Mark told me what happened. That your parents sold it to help pay for the wedding." She wrapped her hands around her latte cup, and I noticed that her engagement ring, a massive diamond solitaire that probably cost more than my annual salary, caught the light from the window. I had no idea they were going to do that. "Nobody seemed to know," I said. "It's amazing how something like that can just happen without anyone being responsible for it." Olivia flinched slightly at the sarcasm in my voice. "Rachel, I need you to know that I never asked for any of this. The bigger reception, the upgraded everything, that was all my mother's idea. But you went along with it." Olivia paused, staring down at her latte. "I've never planned a wedding before. I didn't know how much things cost, or how quickly expenses could spiral out of control. My mother kept saying that we only get one chance to do it right, that it was important to make a good impression, and I trusted her to handle it." I leaned back in my chair. "Must be nice, having someone else worry about the money." "That's not fair," Olivia said, and for the first time since I'd known her, there was real emotion in her voice. "You think this has been easy for me? You think I wanted to be the reason your family is in financial trouble. Are you?" I asked. "In financial trouble?" Olivia was quiet for a long moment, turning her cup in slow circles on the table. "My mother has very specific ideas about what kind of wedding her daughter should have. She's been planning this day since I was 12 years old, and she's not the kind of person who accepts compromises. So you let my parents pay for your mother's vision of the perfect wedding. I didn't know they were struggling to pay for it." Olivia's voice rose slightly. Then she caught herself and looked around to make sure no one was listening. "I thought your parents were fine financially. Mark never said anything about money being tight, and when my mother kept adding things to the list, your father just kept saying it wouldn't be a problem." I studied Olivia's face, looking for signs of deception. She seemed genuinely distressed, but it was hard to tell if she was upset about the situation or just upset about being confronted with the consequences of her choices. "What do you want from me, Olivia?" I asked finally. I want to make this right," she said immediately. "I want to pay you back for your car." I blinked, not sure I'd heard correctly. "What?" "I have money of my own," Olivia said, leaning forward across the table. "My trust fund, my salary, savings from my job. I can write you a check right now for whatever your car was worth. For a moment, I felt a spark of hope. $5,000 would buy me another car, maybe even a better one. It would solve my transportation problems, give me back my independence, restore some small measure of what my family had taken from me. But then I looked at Olivia's face, earnest, guilty, eager to fix everything with money, and I realized that wasn't what I wanted at all. Why? I asked. Because it's the right thing to do. Because you shouldn't have to suffer for my wedding. Olivia reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. How much do you need? I put my hand over hers, stopping her from opening the checkbook. That's not what I meant. Why do you want to make this right? Because you feel guilty, or because you actually understand what was done to me? Olivia looked confused. Does it matter? Either way, you get your money back. It matters to me. I removed my hand from hers and sat back. If you just write me a check, then everyone gets to pretend that this whole thing was just a misunderstanding. Your mother gets her perfect wedding, Mark gets his dream reception, my parents get to feel like they did right by both their children, and you get to feel like you're not the villain in this story. I don't want to be the villain, Olivia said quietly, but you also don't want to be the one who disappoints everyone by scaling back the wedding to something my parents could actually afford. Olivia's face flushed. The wedding is in 3 days. Rachel, the deposits are paid. The flowers are ordered. The caterers are confirmed. It's too late to change anything now. It was too late the moment you let your mother turn my brother's wedding into a social performance for her friends. I stood up from the table. Keep your money, Olivia. I don't want charity from my brother's rich girlfriend. Fiancé, Olivia corrected automatically, then seemed to realize how that sounded. Rachel, please, I'm trying to help. You want to help? Then don't ask me to be in your wedding party. Don't ask me to smile for pictures and pretend that everything's fine. Let me attend as a guest, sit in the back, and get through this day with what's left of my dignity intact. I started to walk away, but Olivia's voice stopped me. Is that really what you want? To sit in the back at your own brother's wedding? I turned around to look at her. She was still sitting at the table, her expensive coat and perfect hair and diamond ring marking her as everything I wasn't and would never be. But there was something in her expression that looked almost like understanding. What I want, I said carefully, is for my family to acknowledge that what they did to me was wrong. Not a mistake, not a miscommunication, not a difficult decision. Wrong. I want them to admit that they sold my car without my permission to pay for luxuries that nobody needed. I want them to recognize that they treated me like my needs didn't matter, like my independence was expendable, like I was just a resource they could use to solve their problems. Olivia was quiet for a long moment. And you think embarrassing them at the wedding will accomplish that? I think telling the truth at the wedding will accomplish that. Rachel, please don't do anything to ruin Saturday. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but this is Mark's day too. He loves you. He doesn't deserve to have his wedding turned into a battlefield. I walked back to the table and leaned down so I could speak quietly. Mark had 3 years to set boundaries with your mother. 3 years to insist on a wedding he could afford. 3 years to protect his family from financial strain. Instead, he let you and your mother plan a fantasy celebration and then stood by while my parents paid for it with my car. So don't tell me what he does or doesn't deserve. I straightened up and looked down at Olivia, who was staring at me with a mixture of shock and something that might have been respect. I'll see you at the wedding, I said, and I promise you, it will be a day none of us will ever forget. I walked away without looking back, leaving Olivia sitting alone at the table with her lavender latte and her guilty conscience. The rest of Wednesday and all of Thursday passed in a blur of work, research, and preparation. I spent my breaks at Powell's looking up legal terms and precedents, making copies of documents, and organizing everything into a neat folder that I kept in my backpack at all times. I called the bank that held the car loan and confirmed what I already knew, that I was the primary borrower, that I had made every single payment, and that my parents' role as co-signers didn't give them the legal right to sell the car without my consent. I also called a lawyer, one of the free legal aid clinics that served low-income clients in Portland. The consultation was brief but informative. What my parents had done was technically theft, even though they were family, even though their names were on the loan. I had grounds for a civil suit, possibly even criminal charges if I wanted to pursue them. I didn't want to send my parents to jail, but I did want them to understand the gravity of what they'd done. Friday evening, the night before the wedding, I sat in my apartment going through my folder one last time. Every document was organized, every page numbered, Every piece of evidence that proved the car was mine clearly marked and ready to present. I'd written out what I wanted to say, practiced it in front of my bathroom mirror until the words were smooth and confident. My phone rang at 8 o'clock. Mark. Rachel, I need to ask you something. What? Are you planning to cause trouble at the wedding tomorrow? I was quiet for a moment, surprised by the directness of the question. What makes you think I would cause trouble? Mom said you seemed upset when she picked you up from work the other night, and Olivia said you had a weird conversation with her at the coffee shop. She's worried you're going to do something to embarrass the family. I'm going to tell the truth, Mark. That's all. What truth? What are you talking about? I could hear the panic creeping into his voice, and part of me felt sorry for him. He was getting married tomorrow, what should be the happiest day of his life, and instead, he was calling his sister to make sure she wasn't going to ruin everything. But a bigger part of me remembered sitting at the bus stop in the rain, remembered Jake threatening to fire me, remembered the dismissive way my father had said it was just a car. The truth about how the wedding was paid for, I said. The truth about what Mom and Dad did to me. The truth about what our family's priorities really are. Rachel, please don't do this. Not at my wedding. If you want to have a conversation about all this, we can sit down next week and talk it through like adults. But don't ruin the most important day of my life. Like adults, I repeated. That's interesting, Mark, because adults ask permission before selling other people's property. Adults have conversations before making decisions that affect other people. Adults consider the consequences of their actions before they act. I get it, okay? I get that you're angry, but taking it out on me and Olivia at our wedding isn't going to solve anything. Actually, I think it's going to solve quite a lot. Mark was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder, more like our father's. If you do anything to embarrass this family tomorrow, if you cause a scene or upset Olivia's parents or make me look bad in front of everyone we know, I will never forgive you. Do you understand me? Never. The threat hung in the air between us like a challenge. For 27 years, the possibility of losing Mark's approval had been enough to keep me in line, to make me swallow my complaints and accept whatever scraps of attention and respect the family was willing to give me. But sitting in my apartment, looking at the folder full of documents that proved my parents had stolen from me, I realized that Mark's forgiveness wasn't worth as much as I'd thought it was. I understand you perfectly, I said. And Mark, I'll never forgive any of you for what you did to me. So I guess we're even. I hung up the phone and turned it off, not wanting to deal with any more calls or texts from family members trying to manage me, trying to convince me to be the good daughter one more time. Tomorrow was Saturday. Tomorrow was the wedding. Tomorrow, everyone was going to learn exactly what Rachel Thompson was made of. I went to bed early and slept better than I had in weeks, dreaming of bright lights and surprised faces and the moment when the truth would finally be spoken out loud. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of October day that makes you believe autumn might be the most beautiful season in the Pacific Northwest. I woke up at 7, made myself a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, and laid out the dress I'd chosen for the wedding, a navy blue midi dress I'd bought on clearance 2 years ago. Professional but not flashy, appropriate but not celebratory. The wedding was at 2 o'clock at the Abernethy Center, a historic venue in Oregon City with sweeping views of the Willamette River. The reception would follow in the same building, with dinner and dancing until midnight. It was exactly the kind of elegant, expensive celebration that Olivia's mother had envisioned, and exactly the kind of event that my parents could never have afforded without selling my car. I spent the morning going through my documents one final time, organizing them in the order I planned to present them, rehearsing the words I'd practiced all week. My hands were steady, my mind was clear, and for the first time since Tuesday, I felt completely calm. At noon, I called a taxi to take me to Oregon City. I could have asked my mother for a ride, but I wanted to arrive on my own terms, under my own power, without owing anyone anything. The taxi cost $45 I couldn't really afford, but it was worth it for the independence. The Abernethy Center was even more beautiful than I'd expected. The main hall was decorated with hundreds of white roses and baby's breath, with flowing silk drapes and crystal chandeliers that cast warm light over everything. Round tables covered in ivory linens were arranged around a dance floor, each one set with fine china and multiple wine glasses and centerpieces that probably cost more than I made in a week. I arrived just as the guests were beginning to take their seats for the ceremony. The bride's side of the aisle was filled with people I didn't recognize. Olivia's extended family, her parents, friends, colleagues from the real estate company. They were all perfectly dressed, perfectly polished, the kind of people who attended charity galas and country club events and never had to worry about whether they could afford their car payments. The groom's side was smaller, filled with faces I'd known my whole life, relatives from both sides of my family, family friends, my parents, co-workers and neighbors. They looked good. Everyone had dressed up for Mark's big day, but there was a subtle difference between them and Olivia's guests, a difference in the cut of their clothes and the confidence in their postures that spoke to the gap between these two worlds my brother was trying to bridge. I found an empty chair in the back row on Mark's side and sat down, placing my purse, which contained the folder of documents, carefully at my feet. A few relatives nodded at me and smiled, but nobody tried to engage me in conversation. They could probably sense that I wasn't in a social mood. At exactly 2 o'clock, the music began. The wedding party processed down the aisle. Mark's college friends as groomsmen, Olivia's sorority sisters as bridesmaids, everyone young and beautiful and radiating happiness. Then came Olivia herself, stunning in a designer gown that had probably cost more than I made in 6 months, walking arm in arm with her father, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who owned half the commercial real estate in downtown Portland. Mark was waiting at the altar in a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, his face glowing with joy and love and anticipation. For a moment, watching him watch his bride walk toward him, I felt a stab of something that might have been regret. This was my brother's wedding day, the most important day of his life, just like he'd said. Did I really want to ruin it? But then I looked at my parents in the front row, at my father's proud smile and my mother's tearful expression, and I remembered Tuesday afternoon when they'd sat at the kitchen table and told me my car was gone. I remembered my mother saying, "It's just a car," and my father dismissing my transportation needs like they were trivial inconveniences. The ceremony was beautiful, I had to admit. The officiant spoke about love and commitment and the joining of two families. Mark and Olivia exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to support each other through whatever challenges life might bring. When they kissed at the end, the whole room erupted in applause and cheers. I clapped politely and smiled when people looked my way, playing the part of the supportive sister just like I'd promised. But inside, I was counting down the minutes until the reception, until the moment when I would finally speak my truth. The cocktail hour was held in a smaller room adjacent to the main hall, with an open bar and servers passing elegant hors d'oeuvres. I nursed a single glass of white wine and watched the two families mingle, or try to mingle. Olivia's relatives clustered together near the windows, talking about their vacation homes and investment portfolios, while my relatives gathered around the appetizer table, clearly impressed by the shrimp and salmon and other delicacies they rarely encountered. Rachel, my Aunt Linda, approached with a wide smile, my father's sister who had always been my favorite relative. "You look beautiful, honey. How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Aunt Linda. How are you?" "Oh, you know me. I'm just so happy for Mark. This is such a beautiful wedding." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Although I have to say, it must have cost your parents a fortune. I hope they didn't go into debt for all this." I smiled and took a sip of my wine. "You should ask them about that." Aunt Linda looked puzzled by my response. But before she could ask what I meant, the doors to the main hall opened, and guests began moving toward their tables for dinner. I found my assigned seat at a table near the back of the room, surrounded by family friends and distant cousins. The conversation was light and cheerful, full of compliments about the decorations and the food, and how beautiful Olivia looked in her dress. I smiled and nodded and made appropriate responses, but my attention was focused on the head table where Mark and Olivia sat with their parents and the wedding party. The dinner was elaborate, multiple courses, perfectly prepared, served by uniformed waitstaff who moved through the room with practiced efficiency. Between the salad and the main course, my father stood up to give a toast. "I want to thank everyone for being here today to celebrate Mark and Olivia," he began, his voice carrying easily through the room. "As parents, Susan and I couldn't be prouder of the man Mark has become, or more excited to welcome Olivia into our family." He paused for applause, beaming at the head table where Mark was grinning, and Olivia was dabbing at her eyes with her napkin. "Mark has always been special," my father continued. "From the time he was a little boy, we knew he was destined for great things. And Olivia, you are everything we could have hoped for in a daughter-in-law. You're kind, intelligent, beautiful, and you make our son happier than we've ever seen him." More applause. I kept my hands in my lap. Planning this wedding has been an incredible experience for our families. We wanted to give Mark and Olivia the celebration they deserved, the kind of day they would remember for the rest of their lives. And looking around this room, seeing all of you here, seeing the joy on their faces, I know we succeeded. My father's voice was getting emotional now, thick with pride and love. We spared no expense because Mark is worth it, because love is worth it, because some things in life are more important than money. The irony of those words hit me like a physical blow. Some things are more important than money, unless you were his daughter, apparently, unless you were Rachel, whose independence and transportation and dignity could be sold to pay for someone else's worth it moment. My father raised his glass, so please join me in toasting Mark and Olivia. May your marriage be filled with love, laughter, and all the happiness you both deserve. The room erupted in cheers and the clinking of glasses. I lifted my wine glass mechanically, but didn't drink, watching as my parents hugged Mark and Olivia at the head table, basking in the glow of their successful celebration. After dinner, the dancing began. Mark and Olivia had their first dance to At Last by Etta James, spinning slowly around the floor while their guests watched and sighed and took pictures. They looked perfect together, young, beautiful, in love, surrounded by family and friends who supported their happiness. I waited through the parent dances, the wedding party dance, the general dancing that followed. I watched couples twirl around the floor, watched children chase each other between the tables, watched my relatives enjoying themselves at the most elegant party most of them had ever attended. At 9 o'clock, just as the evening was hitting its peak of celebration, I stood up from my table and walked to the front of the room where the DJ was set up. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady as I approached him. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to make an announcement." The DJ looked confused. "Is this part of the program? I don't have anything on my list." "It's family business," I said, reaching for the microphone. "I just need a moment." Before he could stop me, I took the microphone and walked to the center of the dance floor. The music stopped abruptly, and gradually, the conversation in the room died down as people realized someone was about to speak. I looked out at the room full of faces, family, friends, strangers, all turning toward me with expressions of curiosity and confusion. At the head table, I could see Mark's face going white with panic, Olivia's mouth falling open in shock, my parents looking at each other with dawning horror. "Good evening, everyone," I said, and my voice was clear and strong through the sound system. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachel Thompson, Mark's sister." A few people clapped politely, unsure of what was happening. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Mark and Olivia's wedding. It really has been a beautiful celebration. Exactly the kind of elegant, expensive party that everyone will remember for years to come." I paused, looking directly at my parents. My mother was shaking her head slightly, as if she could will me to stop talking. My father looked like he was trying to figure out how to get to me across the crowded room. I also want to thank my parents, Susan and David Thompson, for making this wonderful celebration possible. As my father mentioned in his toast, they spared no expense to give Mark and Olivia the wedding of their dreams. More confused applause. People were starting to sense that something was wrong, but they weren't sure what. "What my father didn't mention," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "is how they managed to pay for all this. The flowers, the catering, the venue, the open bar. It's all very expensive, much more than a middle-class family from southeast Portland would normally be able to afford." The room was completely silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving, standing frozen with their trays and wine bottles as they watched this unexpected turn in the evening's program. "So, I thought you all should know how my parents managed to fund this beautiful celebration." I reached into my purse and pulled out my folder, holding it up so everyone could see. "They sold my car, without my permission, without even telling me until after it was done." A murmur ran through the room. I could see people turning to each other, whispering, trying to process what they were hearing. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. It was just a car, right? And families should support each other, should make sacrifices for each other. And normally, I would agree with that. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. But this wasn't a sacrifice I chose to make. This was my car, a 2016 Honda Civic that I saved 18 months to buy. I worked 2 jobs, ate ramen noodles for dinner, turned down social events, and carefully budgeted every dollar so I could afford something that was completely mine. I held up the purchase agreement. This is the original sales contract, showing that I was the primary purchaser. Yes, my parents co-signed because I was 23 and had limited credit history. but I was the one who bought the car. Another document. Well, these are my payment records, showing that I made every single payment for 4 years. Every month. On time. From my own checking account. Not one payment was ever made by my parents. I could see Mark starting to stand up from the head table, but Olivia grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. She was saying something to him, but I couldn't hear what. This is my insurance policy. In my name. These are my registration renewals. Paid by me. This is my maintenance record. Every oil change and repair paid for with my own money. I looked directly at my parents. My mother had tears streaming down her face. My father looked like he wanted to disappear. 4 years of proof that this car was mine in every way that mattered. And my parents sold it, without asking me, without discussing it with me, without considering what it would mean for my ability to get to my 2 jobs, to buy groceries, to have any kind of independence in my life. The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel 300 people hanging on every word, could see the shock and confusion and dawning understanding on their faces. They sold my car for $5,000 to help pay for tonight's celebration. And when I found out, when I was devastated and heartbroken and angry, do you know what they told me? I paused, letting the question hang in the air. They told me it was just a car. They told me that Mark's wedding was more important than my transportation. They told me that some things matter more than money, apparently just not when it's my things, and my money, and my independence being sacrificed. Now I could see people in the audience turning to look at my parents with very different expressions than they'd worn during my father's toast. Disapproval, shock, judgment. So I wanted all of you to know how this beautiful wedding was paid for. I wanted you to know that when you're admiring the flowers and the food and the open bar, you're looking at the liquidated independence of the groom's sister. I wanted you to know that my parents thought this party was worth more than my ability to get to work, to take care of myself, to have something in my life that was completely my own. I folded the documents and put them back in the folder. I also wanted you to know that I'm not okay with it. I'm not understanding or supportive or willing to just let it go for the sake of family harmony. What my parents did was wrong, and I will not pretend otherwise to spare their feelings or protect their reputation. Mark was on his feet now, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Rachel, stop. Just stop. I looked at my brother, this man I'd loved, and looked up to my entire life, who had let our parents destroy my independence to pay for his dream wedding. I'm almost finished, Mark. I turned back to the room. I want to be clear that I don't blame Mark and Olivia for this. They didn't ask my parents to sell my car. They didn't know what was being sacrificed to pay for their celebration. But they also didn't ask questions when the budget kept expanding, didn't wonder where the money was coming from, didn't consider that someone might be paying a price for their perfect day. Olivia was crying now, her perfect makeup running down her cheeks. Several of her bridesmaids had moved to comfort her, shooting angry looks in my direction. So I hope you all enjoy the rest of the evening. Dance, drink, celebrate the happy couple. Just remember that every dollar spent tonight came from somewhere, and someone paid for it in ways that had nothing to do with money. I handed the microphone back to the stunned DJ and walked toward the exit, my folder clutched tightly in my hands. The room was still completely silent behind me, 300 people processing what they'd just heard, trying to figure out how to respond to this unprecedented breach of wedding etiquette. I was almost to the door when I heard my father's voice behind me. Rachel, wait. I turned around. He was pushing through the crowd, his face red with anger and embarrassment, my mother close behind him with tears streaming down her cheeks. How could you do this? My father hissed when he reached me, grabbing my arm. How could you humiliate us like this, in front of everyone we know? I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. Well, how could you steal my car? We didn't steal anything. We're your parents. We co-signed that loan. Co-signing doesn't give you ownership. It gives you financial responsibility if I default, which I never did. What you did was theft. Dad. Legal. Documented theft. My mother stepped forward. Rachel, please, can't we discuss this privately? You've already made your point. Everyone heard you. Good, I said. Everyone should hear the truth. Mark appeared at my father's shoulder, his face a mask of fury. Are you happy now? Are you satisfied? You've ruined my wedding. You've embarrassed Olivia in front of her entire family. You've made us all look like criminals. I stared at my brother, this man who had never once in his life had to choose between groceries and gas money, who was angry at me for telling the truth about what our parents had done to fund his fairy tale celebration. I didn't make you look like criminals, Mark. I just told people what you actually did. What we did was support family, my father said, his voice getting louder. What we did was make a difficult decision to help our son on the most important day of his life. What you did, I said, pulling my arm free from his grasp, was steal from your daughter to pay for your son's luxury wedding. And the fact that you can't see the difference says everything anyone needs to know about this family. I turned to walk away again, but Mark's voice stopped me. If you leave now, if you walk out on my wedding after what you just did, we're done. Do you understand me? We're done. I never want to see you again. I looked back at him one more time, at this brother I'd loved and admired and defended my whole life, who was now threatening to disown me for refusing to quietly accept being robbed. We've been done since Tuesday, I said. You just didn't realize it yet. I walked out of the Abernethy Center into the cool October night, leaving behind the wedding, the family, the life I'd known for 27 years. Behind me, I could hear the gradual resumption of conversation, the awkward attempts to restart the celebration, the murmur of 300 people trying to process what they'd just witnessed. I called a taxi from the parking lot and waited under the stars, breathing the clean autumn air and feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts, some from family members, some from friends who'd heard about what happened, some from numbers I didn't recognize. I turned the phone off and put it in my purse next to the folder that had changed everything. The taxi arrived 15 minutes later, and I gave the driver my address. As we pulled away from the venue, I could see warm light spilling from the windows, the wedding reception continuing without me. Mark and Olivia would finish their first dance, cut their cake, toss the bouquet. Their guests would drink and laugh and dance until midnight, and in the morning, they would fly to Italy for their honeymoon. But they would never forget this night. None of them would ever forget the moment when Rachel Thompson stood up and told the truth about the price of perfection, and neither would I. I woke up Sunday morning to the sound of rain against my apartment windows, and 17 missed calls on my phone. The wedding felt like a distant dream, or maybe a nightmare, standing in front of 300 people, holding up those documents, watching my family's faces transform from confusion to horror to rage. But the folder on my kitchen table was real, and so were the consequences of what I'd done. I made coffee and sat at my small dining table, scrolling through the messages that had accumulated overnight. Most of them were from family members, angry texts from cousins, a long voicemail from my Aunt Linda asking what had gotten into me, several furious messages from relatives I barely knew who felt compelled to share their opinions about my inappropriate behavior. But there were other messages too. A text from Sarah, a coworker from the bookstore. Holy shit, Rachel. I heard about what happened. Are you okay? Another from my college roommate Jessica, who lived in Seattle now. My mom heard about the wedding from her friend who was there. She said you were incredibly brave. Call me. The most surprising message was from someone I didn't expect. Olivia. Rachel, I know you probably don't want to hear from me right now, but I needed to tell you that I'm sorry. You were right about everything. I should have asked more questions, should have insisted on a smaller wedding when I realized how much it was costing your parents. I was selfish, and I let my mother's expectations matter more than your family's financial well-being. I don't know if this helps, but I want you to know that I see you, and I understand why you did what you did. I stared at the message for a long time, surprised by its sincerity. Then I turned off my phone and spent the rest of Sunday in blessed silence, reading a book, doing laundry, and trying to process the fact that I had just blown up my entire family in the most public way possible. Monday morning brought a return to reality. I took the bus to work, arriving at Grind Coffee 10 minutes late again, and found Jake waiting for me with his arms crossed and a distinctly unfriendly expression. Thompson, we need to talk. My heart sank. Okay. He led me to the tiny office behind the espresso machines and closed the door. I heard about what happened at your brother's wedding. Of course he had. Portland was a small city in many ways, and drama like what I'd caused at the Abernethy Center would spread through the gossip networks like wildfire. And? I asked. Jake sat down behind the desk and steepled his fingers like he was conducting a corporate board meeting instead of managing a coffee shop. Look, Rachel, I don't really care about your family drama, but what I do care about is reliability. You've been late 3 times in the past week. You're clearly dealing with personal issues that are affecting your work performance. And now I have customers asking me about my employee who caused a scene at some fancy wedding. Customers are asking about me. My girlfriend's sister was at that wedding. She told everyone about your little speech. And now people are coming in here asking if you're the crazy barista who ruined her brother's reception. Jake leaned back in his chair. That's not the kind of attention this business needs. I felt the walls closing in around me. Jake, please, I need this job. I know I've been having transportation issues, but I'm working on solving them. And what happened at the wedding has nothing to do with my work here, doesn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you have serious judgment issues. Normal people don't air their family's dirty laundry at weddings, Rachel. Normal people handle their problems privately. Normal people. There was that phrase again, the one my family had been using to describe what I should have done instead of standing up for myself. I was standing up for myself, I said quietly. My parents stole my car to pay for that wedding. I had every right to tell people the truth. Jake shrugged. Maybe you did, but you also scared the hell out of a lot of people. If you're willing to embarrass your own family like that, what might you do to customers who piss you off? Or coworkers? Or me? The unfairness of it took my breath away. I was being fired not for anything I'd done at work, but for refusing to quietly accept being robbed by my own parents. I'm letting you go, Thompson. This is your last shift. I worked the rest of my shift in a daze, making drinks mechanically while customers whispered and stared. A few people I recognized from the wedding came in during the morning rush, and they watched me with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval to something that might have been sympathy. At 2 o'clock, I untied my apron for the last time and walked out of Grind Coffee unemployed. The bus ride to Powell's Books felt longer than usual, and I spent the entire trip wondering how I was going to pay my rent with only one part-time job. But Powell's turned out to be different. When I arrived for my afternoon shift, my manager Claire pulled me aside with an expression of concern rather than judgment. Rachel, I heard about what happened this weekend. Are you okay? I looked at her warily, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm fine. Claire was in her 50s, a lifelong Portlander who'd worked at Powell's for 20 years and had seen every kind of human drama imaginable. I also heard that you lost your job at the coffee shop. News travels fast. It does in this city. Claire paused, studying my face. Look, I don't know all the details about your family situation, and frankly, it's none of my business. But I do know that you're one of the most reliable, hardworking employees we have. You know the inventory better than people who've been here longer. Customers love talking to you about books, and you've never once caused any problems. I felt tears threatening behind my eyes. Thank you. So I want to offer you full-time hours, 35 hours a week, with benefits. It's not a lot of money, but it's steady, and it would give you health insurance. The relief was overwhelming. Claire, thank you. Yes, absolutely yes. Good. You can start the new schedule next week. She paused. And Rachel, whatever you did at that wedding, whatever your family thinks about it, you handled yourself with dignity today. That says a lot about your character. I worked my shift with renewed energy, grateful to be in a place where I was valued for who I was, rather than judged for refusing to be a victim. Books had always been my refuge, and being surrounded by thousands of stories about people overcoming adversity felt like exactly where I needed to be. The next few weeks settled into a new routine. I worked at Powell's 5 days a week, took the bus everywhere, and learned to navigate Portland's public transportation system like a native. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable, and slowly I began to feel like I could build a stable life even without my family's support. The silence from my parents and Mark was complete. No calls, no texts, no attempts to reconcile or even to continue the argument we'd started at the wedding. It was as if I had simply ceased to exist for them, which hurt more than their anger had. But other relationships in my life began to flourish in unexpected ways. My Aunt Linda called 2 weeks after the wedding to apologize for her initial reaction. I was so focused on the embarrassment of the situation that I didn't stop to think about what your parents actually did to you, she said. Selling your car without asking you was wrong, Rachel. I should have said that right away instead of worrying about family drama. My college roommate Jessica drove down from Seattle to visit, and we spent a long weekend talking about everything that had happened. You know what the crazy part is? She said as we sat in my apartment drinking wine and eating takeout Chinese food. Yeah, if this had happened to anyone else, if someone told you their parents had sold their car without permission to pay for their sibling's wedding, you would have been outraged on their behalf. I know, I said, but when it's your own family, you're supposed to just accept it. You're supposed to understand and sacrifice and keep the peace. Says who? Who made that rule? It was a good question, and one I'd been asking myself a lot lately. The most unexpected development was my growing friendship with some of my coworkers at Powell's. Claire had been right about the customers loving to talk to me about books, and several of them had become regular visitors who sought me out for recommendations. One of them, a graduate student named David who was working on his PhD in literature, started asking me out for coffee after my shifts. "I have to take the bus everywhere," I warned him the first time he suggested dinner. "So, I like the bus. It's good for reading." David was the kind of person who saw my situation as a temporary inconvenience rather than a character flaw. He picked me up for our dates, drove me home afterward, and never once made me feel like my lack of a car was something to be ashamed of. "You know what I think," he said one evening as we walked along the Willamette River, watching the sunset paint the water gold. "I think what you did at that wedding was incredibly brave. Most people think it was cruel and inappropriate. Most people have never had their parents steal from them to fund someone else's dream." David stopped walking and turned to face me. "Rachel, you stood up in front of hundreds of people and told the truth about something that was genuinely wrong. That takes courage most people don't have. It cost me my family. It cost you a family that was willing to sacrifice your well-being for appearances. That's not the same thing." By December, 3 months after the wedding, I had settled into my new life. I was making enough money at Powell's to cover my expenses. I had developed a small but solid group of friends, and I was dating someone who valued my intelligence and strength rather than seeing them as threats. I also received an unexpected Christmas card from Olivia. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note. "Rachel, I know this doesn't fix what happened, but I want you to have the money for a new car. You were right about everything, and I'm sorry it took me so long to do something about it. I hope you're well, Olivia." I stared at the check for a long time, remembering our conversation at the coffee shop when she'd first offered to pay me back and I'd refused. The money would solve my transportation problems, would give me back the independence I'd lost. But taking it would also feel like accepting charity, like admitting that what I'd done at the wedding was about money rather than principle. In the end, I decided to cash the check, not because I needed Olivia's charity, but because she was right. I deserved compensation for what had been taken from me. I used the money to buy a reliable used Honda Accord, not as nice as my old car, but dependable enough to get me where I needed to go. The day I drove my new car off the lot, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: freedom. Not just the freedom to go where I wanted when I wanted, but the freedom that comes from knowing you can take care of yourself, that you don't need anyone else's permission to live your life on your own terms. I drove to the Oregon coast that weekend, something I hadn't been able to do since losing my car. I stood on the beach in Cannon Beach, watching the waves crash against the famous Haystack Rock, breathing the salt air, and feeling genuinely happy for the first time since the wedding. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "How's your first road trip in the new car?" I texted back, "Perfect. The car runs great. The coast is beautiful. And I remember why I love being able to go wherever I want. That's my girl," he responded. "Drive safe. Can't wait to hear about your adventure." As I walked back to my car, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I had been the good daughter, the understanding sister, the one who always sacrificed for the sake of family harmony. I had defined myself by my relationships with other people, had measured my worth by their approval. Now, I was something different. I was a woman who knew her own value, who wouldn't accept being treated as less than she deserved, who was willing to stand up for herself, even when it cost her everything she'd thought she wanted. The drive back to Portland was peaceful, the December landscape rolling past my windows as I listened to music and thought about the year ahead. I had a job I loved, friends who supported me, a relationship that brought me joy rather than stress. I had a car again, and an apartment that was completely mine, and a future that I was building entirely on my own terms. I thought about Mark and Olivia, probably settling into their new house in the West Hills, building their married life together. I thought about my parents, who had chosen to lose a daughter rather than admit they'd been wrong. I felt sad about those relationships, genuinely sad, but I didn't regret the choice I'd made. Some people might say I should have handled it differently, should have confronted my family privately, should have found a way to maintain the relationships while still standing up for myself. But those people had never been in my position, had never had to choose between their dignity and their family's approval. I had made my choice, and I was living with the consequences. Some of those consequences were painful. The silence from my parents, the loss of my brother, the knowledge that I would probably never be welcomed back into the family I'd grown up in. But other consequences were beautiful. The The knowledge that I could take care of myself, that I didn't need anyone else's permission to live my life, that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. The understanding that real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your self-respect, that healthy relationships are built on mutual respect rather than unquestioning loyalty. As I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete peace with my choices. I had lost a family, but I had found myself. I had given up security, but I had gained freedom. I had chosen truth over harmony, and I would make that choice again every single time. My name is Rachel Thompson. I'm 27 years old, and I am nobody's backup plan. I am nobody's sacrifice. I am nobody's afterthought. I am exactly who I was meant to be, and that is enough.